G'day, it's Nigel here. Welcome back to the Sax School Online podcast. Today we're talking about mouthpieces. We all use one and we're also tempted to try new ones too, but it's a minefield out there. With so many mouthpieces on the market these days, it's really easy to choose the wrong one, and that's frustrating and frankly expensive as well. So today I'm chatting with Jody Espina from Jody Jazz to see if we can simplify the whole process and give you some guidelines that will help you make better mouthpiece choices. Real quick though, just before we get stuck in with the episode, if you love learning how to play saxophone better and you enjoy the podcast, could I just ask you to share it with one other person? Honestly, it would really mean the world to us and help us to reach more friends like you. Thanks a bunch. So Jody, you're an expert on mouthpieces. You know all about them, but I'll bet there was a time back at the start when you didn't know much, just like I didn't. And I can remember back when I was younger, someone gave me this mouthpiece and said, "Hey, kid, this mouthpiece is going to be awesome for you. It's a Berg Larsen 80/3. I had no idea what that meant. But the thing is, it wasn't a good mouthpiece for me and it didn't suit me at all. And I didn't understand why it didn't suit me. Did you ever have an experience like that?
I had a really important experience like that. I got into college when I was 17 and I got a gig playing with a big band of all, older men. And they had famous stars come through, Mel Torme and Patti Page and all these things. And I got the gig on baritone sax. And I had been playing, mostly alto and tenor and clarinet stuff. So I had to borrow a baritone, but I had to get a mouthpiece. And I went to the store, the local store in Tampa, Florida, and I saw it happened to be a metal Berg Larsen mouthpiece there. It really seemed like the only one that was going to be, professional mouthpiece. And I tried it and, played it. And so I didn't know anything better. That's the mouthpiece I played on these gigs. And these gigs, for me, I was on the edge of my seat because we'd have a rehearsal in the afternoon, sight read everything, and then do the gig that night. Sometimes it was a week-long engagement or maybe just a night. But sometimes it'd be like a low C or B flat pianissimo or mezzo piano, and I'd kind of I wouldn't cut it, I wouldn't be there. They're looking for the baritone of the sax section to always be there. And I would not quite make it, And I almost got fired. And the guy, the guy was like, why are you going to be a professional musician? I was better than you when I was your age, all this stuff. And I kept working at it. But I never knew until so many years later, I was in New York City. Jody Jazz was already about 5 years old. One day, I found my old shoebox of mouthpieces, and I looked at that Berg Larsen in there, that metal baritone 110/1. And I got it out, and I stuck it on my baritone, and I go, oh! And it was terrible. The mouthpiece doesn't work. I'm surrounded by great mouthpieces by this time, and I didn't know. And it was sabotaging me. So it's really important because a mouthpiece can totally sabotage you.
Oh man, absolutely. And it's so frustrating if you don't understand what's going on. You're thinking, is it me? What's going wrong? Why everyone else says this is a great mouthpiece. Why do I sound terrible on it, right? Yeah, it's a difficult thing. So I think understanding about mouthpieces is important. And that's why we love getting you to come and help us at Sax School, actually. We've got thousands of people learning in there, and you've been really helpful with just giving them information and advice so they can make good choices. So like maybe today we can demystify this whole process of how you go about choosing a mouthpiece. So when you go to a shop like sax.co in London and there's, hundreds of choices there, you can narrow it down and at least maybe make a more intelligent choice for a mouthpiece. So perhaps to start this journey then, why should people look at upgrading their mouthpiece first? Why should that be the first thing they do?
Well, what if your mouthpiece is sabotaging you? If it's working wrong, what it means is it's not having a seal. It means that seal comes from checking it with the pop test. So this is one thing. You put your hand on here, close it completely, suck all the air out, and take your mouth away. You know what? Can you hear that, Nigel?
Yeah, I can
Okay.
hear it. Yeah, I can hear it.
I was doing a
Yeah.
Zoom thing, and the Zoom filter took out the pop as if it were noise. So now, if your reed is
And
warped,
they're all thinking, what on earth is this guy
I
doing?
know it didn't work.
Yeah.
So if your reed is warped, it might not seal also. When it doesn't seal, you just keep sucking air out of it and it doesn't ever stop. But the mouthpiece can be malformed. So what I want to say back to those stories, those horror stories, is if you're in the beginning, try and get your equipment played by a professional, okay? And that means every part of it, the mouthpiece, the horn, the reed even. Just make sure that's one thing you'll know it's working, because sometimes you don't know if your horn is leaking or, but when you get to the store, the question was, what do you do when you get to the store? Is that it?
Yeah, well, I guess I want to just explain or at least discuss why upgrading your mouthpiece is the
Okay.
first choice. Something we always say to our members. Like we've got a lot of adults learning with us
Yeah.
that are just starting their journey on saxophone. And for a lot of people, they'll either buy a used sax or they go and buy a less expensive saxophone, and it'll come with a stock mouthpiece, which might be a copy of something, probably just a plastic one. And so we often suggest to people, well, if you're ready to start doing some upgrades, if you're curious to expand your sound, and you've already got some basic skills together, the first thing you should upgrade is not your saxophone; it should actually be a mouthpiece, because we always say to people, well, that's the bit that you blow in, and that the first thing that shapes the sound, and it's going to have the biggest impact, and it's also potentially cheaper than upgrading your whole saxophone. So you can make a change here that will actually improve your sound, and it doesn't mean changing your whole horn. Is that fair to say?
It really is, and it's almost from day one. Again, very important. Make sure that part of it is working, because if it's not, you're just sabotaged from the beginning. And I'm so passionate about it with amateurs and especially kids too. If that's they got their musical start and their friend is getting all their notes and their low notes, and then they're not, they think it's them, and their confidence is gone. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing. The reason those stock mouthpieces, sometimes what stock means is it's got no name on it, or it has the name of the horn, which means the manufacturer just hired somebody to make a mouthpiece. The manufacturer usually doesn't spend more than $10 for that mouthpiece, often less. And sometimes it's plastic molded and it could be warped. And that's the problem. At best, when they function well, they don't sound great. If you put on a much more quality mouthpiece, all of a sudden your sound takes another leap. So it's definitely worth the investment, getting a good start.
And it doesn't need to be expensive, right? I mean, we can talk later about some of the first step mouthpieces that you sell through Jody Jazz. I know a lot of our Saxical members use them. In fact, I've got some here too, which I love. But we also talk to our Saxical members about even upgrading to something like a Yamaha 4C, which is not expensive, but it's very standard. And if you're coming from a generic, unbranded plastic mouthpiece, even that's a step up.
It is, and they're quite consistent. So we can't say that with all brands, with even well-known brands sometimes, but and that's just been my pet peeve, is consistency, and so, but that I have confidence that if you buy a Yamaha 4C, it will seal, and you're getting a decent start.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I want to get on to a uh, set of guidelines that I know that we've spoken about, that you use for like 3 guidelines that will help people to choose a mouthpiece. But before we get to that, I thought it might be just interesting to have a quick chat about some of the mistakes that we see people making when they do choose mouthpieces. I've seen this. Well, I've seen this amongst our members at Sax School that come to us. You must see it with people that come to your shop and say, hey, Jody, I need a mouthpiece. I've got all these other mouthpieces. They're just not working for me. So are there some common things that you see people getting wrong when they go and choose a mouthpiece?
They might go too big a tip opening, thinking that I want to be good, so I'll get that one. But you have to have the muscles, the development to play the bigger tip openings. And if you don't, as you're playing 10, 15 minutes, it starts to just go like this. Um, it's not going to help you. So the guideline is go to those lower tip openings when you're only playing less than 4 hours a week. Or so one thing is going to too big a tip opening. Another thing is probably going to too bright a mouthpiece often.
Yeah, I see that. I see that a lot. I mean, hey, I see it now amongst adults. I used to see it a lot when I was younger in school, or even as a band director, seeing people come along with a mouthpiece that's just way too bright for playing in a concert band setting, or let alone an orchestra or something. And actually, if you're a pro player and you rock up to an orchestra with a really bright mouthpiece, you probably won't get asked to come back. It's like a big red flag. So yeah, those are definitely things that people can get wrong.
One more classic thing that they can get wrong is the reed strength. So um, they were recommended, maybe in their old days in playing a classical mouthpiece, they were recommending a 3.5 classical reed. Now they're playing popular music. They might be on a mouthpiece with a bigger tip opening, and they're still on that hard classical reed. So every mouthpiece can really be optimized with the right reed strength. So that's, if we can go into it later, but reed strength is
Yeah.
also a classic mistake. And generally, I
Oh,
see it
cool.
too hard.
Okay, that's a great point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And if you're new to the whole idea of changing mouthpieces, that could be really confusing, right? I know that I usually play on a size 3 reed. Why doesn't it work on this new mouthpiece?
Right. And sometimes the opposite can be true. It could be too soft. Somebody could be on a classical mouthpiece like a Selmer C Star, and they're playing on a 2 or a 1.5. They say, my sound is too bright and plasticky. Well, that reed is going to sound plasticky on that mouthpiece. So the smaller the tip opening, the harder the reed, the bigger the tip opening, the softer reed. That's just a generalization.
Yeah, cool. That's a great rule. Okay, so speaking of tip openings then, let's have a quick chat about the anatomy of a mouthpiece. If anyone's unsure about all this sort of terminology, could you give us a quick overview of the parts of a mouthpiece?
The number one part people want to know is what's that number on the side of the mouthpiece? 4, 5, 6, or C, or C star, or D. And that's talking about the tip opening. That's the distance between the reed at the tip of the reed and the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece curves away. And the more it curves away, that's a bigger tip opening. It's a larger gap. So the reed has to travel further, and for it to travel further, it needs more energy put into it in air, how much air, and how much muscles you put. So people think that bigger tip opening gives them automatically a much bigger, louder sound. Not really. Not really. It's what's inside the mouthpiece, how shallow the chamber is inside. The closer that material is to the reed, that's a shallow chamber, and that's a brighter, louder mouthpiece. The deeper it goes, it's a darker mouthpiece.
Darker mouthpiece. Okay, so you've talked about tip opening there and also the chamber size. And is chamber size something that is normally, I'm just thinking from the perspective of somebody who's new to this whole thing, would they go into a shop and see that specified, or is that something that's generally just mentioned in marketing for a mouthpiece brand or style?
You might need to get some guidance and say, I think uh, you might have to look at it, and you can see that compared to one mouthpiece to the other, one has material much higher, closer to the reed. You can also look through the shank of the mouthpiece. Um, this this is the shank, and when you look through here, you can see how. Let's see. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can see that as kind of a big area in there. And then if I show you,
So for anyone who's listening and not watching, we're talking about looking in the back end of the mouthpiece and looking at the shape inside.
I've got an HR star. This one is an HR star. It's bigger inside. And then this DVHR, it's smaller inside. It's going to be brighter.
I love how simple that is. So basically, pick up the mouthpiece and have a look in, and you'll be able to see from the shape of it whether it's got a bigger chamber or a smaller chamber. So that's, and I guess those are the two main things, right? The tip opening and the chamber size. Is there anything else people need to be aware of?
Well, the other thing that plays a fairly significant role in it is the facing curve length. So what that means is when I talked about the reed and the mouthpiece curving away, it starts to curve away at some point in relation to the how far it is away from the tip. So you've got a table where the reed sits, that's flat. Let's hope so. And then the mouthpiece starts to curve away. When it begins to curve away, that's called the break. That's the length of the facing curve is how far it is from the tip, that curve. Now, the reason this is important is, first of all, it lets the reed vibrate, and it affects how the mouthpiece blows and like how much bottom is in the sound. It affects if it's shorter curve, altissimo is easier, but it doesn't have as much a big rounded sound and not as free blowing. But what the important thing is how much mouthpiece does the player take in their mouth? So their teeth, I sent you another chart, I think, that shows kind of the teeth coming up towards the reed. The lip is over, but the teeth are coming up. And where those teeth hit that reed is important in relation to the facing curve. So two people might love different mouthpieces, and maybe it's just because of the amount of the mouthpiece that they take in their mouth.
Can I just ask you, Jody? So is that dependent on the person's physiology? Like one person might just have a different shaped mouth to another person?
It could be that. It could be their preference. In general, classical players take less mouthpiece than jazz players. And because jazz players are trying to get the most or more vibration generally out of that reed, more buzz, and classical players want a warmer, kind of more controlled sound. So there is something to be said. If you're changing to a more popular mouthpiece, you might experiment a little bit with how much mouthpiece you take in. I did a YouTube video, how to get a jazzy sound, and it talks about, changing your reed, changing your embouchure from kind of tight clarinet rolled over to a looser, pillowy lower lip, and it talk about taking a more mouthpiece.
That's interesting. So when you're designing a mouthpiece, then Jody, am I understanding then that a classical mouthpiece has got a shorter facing curve, and a popular or jazzy style mouthpiece might have a longer one?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. We really have, in our classical mouthpieces, we have a lot of different curves. Some are long, some are shorter. Same in jazz. We have, the curve is really the most important part of that mouthpiece. And it's so weird how much, that's why mouthpieces are so inconsistent, because they don't get the curve the same. And that's what we try and do. That curve is amazing. And so we've used 30, 40 different kind of schedules. A curve has several radius in it, radii, I guess you say. But and there's all different kinds. So it's like what I'm going after that mouthpiece in that particular one, and we experiment a lot with curves. And finally, when we hit that right curve, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Hey, real quick, just a reminder that if you do want to improve your sax playing this year, don't forget to follow the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you know what? It would just be awesome if you could take a second out of your day to leave us a 5-star review. That would just be brilliant. Thanks a bunch. Right, let's get back to the episode. There's so much design work and thinking and planning and also skill that goes into the manufacture of a mouthpiece. And that's why mouthpieces are expensive, right? Because that's also why I guess the cheap ones don't always sound so good, because they don't have that attention to detail and design, all that background in them.
Yeah, people are fascinated when they come to the factory and see what we do and how much care we're taking and stuff like that. It's, and I think I've always felt like an advocate for the customer, because I was just a guy, just a player, and then I fell into this mouthpiece making, and it's been very serious to me, because I was always an educator too. I was just really serious that, you're selling something, especially with my name on it, it better be right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, a testament to it, to how well you're doing, is the fact that our members love using your mouthpieces, and loads of our members have got Jody Jazz pieces, and they rave about the support that you give them too. It's something we can talk about a bit later on, actually. But let's crack on and talk about these three guidelines. It's a complicated process choosing a mouthpiece, but I'd just love to find a way that we can kind of make it a little bit simpler and give people at least some sort of framework they can use for choosing. So, if we had to break it down to just like 3 points as a starting point, that to help people make choices for mouthpieces, what do you think the first one would be?
I guess, how long have you been playing? And I almost break it up into, you know, how many hours a week do you play? So, so how long have you been playing? If it's you know 6 months or less, or even a year or less, it depends. Uh, you don't want to get too big a tip opening. You really want to stay in those lower tip openings. Um, if you're practicing 4 hours or less a week, you again still want to stay in those lower tip openings so you can play and not get too fatigued.
So that's a good guideline. Okay, so if you're relatively new to saxophone, or if you're not playing very many hours per week, best to stay with a smaller tip opening. But if you're playing for longer or you're more experienced, then you could consider larger tip openings. Is that right?
Probably. And if you're getting more than 4 hours a week, we have these charts under resources on jodyjazz.com, and you can see they're color coded. So the green color in the middle is if you're playing more than 4 hours a week, it's the most popular tip openings. You can probably deal with those. If you're playing less, stay on to the left, kind of this pink color. The orange color is the really big tip openings, and they're not necessary. You're not going to get a bigger sound. When we design mouthpieces, I try and make each tip opening, it's its own program, so that it has the same sound, even though it's a bigger tip opening. So
Right, gotcha.
you'll get slightly more
So
harmonics in the bigger tip openings, but the bang for your buck is the most important thing, is the most comfortable for you.
yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a really good point. And do you think it's also fair to say that, like a first guideline for choosing a mouthpiece should be to not go too far away from the size you're currently playing? So, obviously, thinking about how long you've been playing for. But if you're playing on a 5 now, it's quite a big jump to go up to an 8, or even a 7, right? So, is that a fair thing to suggest?
That's fair. And normally when people start, they are on about a 4. Let's say that Yamaha 4C or the stock mouthpieces are around a 4. So if they are wanting to stay in the classical music sound, go to a good quality 4. You don't need to go up in tip opening. If you're going to a jazz, you can go to a 5 or a 6. But like you said, there's no reason to go up to a 7 or 8. If you give me a 5, I'll play on any job, and you won't know that's a 5, right? But maybe I take more mouthpiece, so ultimately, if a 6 or 7 feels better for me.
Yeah, cool. I think it's good to remember too, there's so many great legendary players that we listen to and love that played on small mouthpieces. So it's not like, yeah, not like everybody plays on a massive. Everyone, like, I met Ernie Watts once, and he was telling me about his custom Otto Link, which was, I can't even remember, it was something stupid like a size 11 or something, I don't know. But Cannonball Adderley didn't play on a big mouthpiece like that. Loads of those great players from the 50s
Ben Webster,
didn't.
Coleman Hawkins were in smaller tenor mouthpieces. And a lot of people start to think, oh, I've been playing 4 years, I better play a number 4 reed by now. Or especially high school players, they get each year they want to go up a half strength of reed, and that's not true either. So and all those most of those guys you mentioned played about a 2.5 reed. Um, not necessarily a hard reed. Coltrane and Bird played hard reeds, Stan Getz, but a lot of guys played. Cannonball played like a 2.5. you know.
Amazing, amazing. It's funny. You sent me over some smaller mouthpieces recently, and I've actually been experimenting. So on my alto, for a long time, I've played on a 7. I think I even had something bigger, a Yanagisawa mouthpiece I played on for years, which was even bigger than that. But now I've been experimenting, coming down to a size 5, and finding the reed. You always talk about, like you mentioned before, getting the reed combo with the mouthpiece right. And I'm starting to dial it in now, and it's quite interesting to me how I'm finding I am able to get a sound I'm happy with, and I don't have to work as hard. And it just means approaching it from a different direction. Okay, so that's a brilliant first guideline. Think about how long you're actually playing, and if you're playing less, go for a smaller size mouthpiece. If you're playing for longer, then you could consider a larger one. But don't think about going too many sizes away from where you are at the moment. Okay, so what about the second guideline then? Should we talk about the versatility of a mouthpiece?
That's a good idea. Um, you know, I think unless you're in a heavy metal rock band. Now, by the way, we're talking to our primarily kind of our adult amateurs, right? That play a variety of music, but unless they're in a heavy metal rock band, uh, they shouldn't probably go for the loudest, brightest mouthpiece because it might put them in a kind of pigeonhole them. Um, a professional who's practiced all their life can take that bright mouthpiece and actually fool you and make it sound dark, but they're working to do it. So and you don't want, even if you like Stan Getz and Paul Desmond, you may not want to use the darkest mouthpiece because it's going to, again, without being a really accomplished professional, you're not going to be able to change the sound of that as easy as a great professional. So it's going to put you in that really dark thing, and you may get in a big band or something or do a pop tune. So you want to go, I think, in the middle of the road. Uh, it's especially, look to those mouthpieces, especially if you get to try stuff. Look to those middle of the road mouthpieces, not too bright, not too dark. But if you get to try a bunch, hey man, if you have the time, try everything.
Yeah, versatility, I think, is a massive thing. It's a really, really important point that I think a lot of less experienced saxophone players overlook or get wrong. And I mentioned before about turning up to an orchestra with a really bright metal mouthpiece, but the same could be said for turning up to play in a community band with a really bright mouthpiece, or going to do a pop gig with a really dark mouthpiece. So, these days if you've got something that's a bit more in the middle, you can get around it with your microphone and your setup and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I have to say, it's one of the things I really love about your mouthpieces, Jody. I love the HR Star and I love the DVHR, both for those reasons, because I can make them sound quite dark, I can make them sound quite bright, but they're not too much in either direction. Yeah,
And that's
a really good
part
point.
of working on the design too, and always trying to bring in bottom, lower harmonics, mid and lower to a mouthpiece with power. Even the Superjet that we have, that's our brightest, strongest mouthpiece, has still a lot of bottom. So I still haven't made the super paint peeler with no bottom. One of these days it'll come, but I was just in Costa
A
Rica.
passion project.
Costa Rica, that's what they need. I went to like a salsa gig, and man, they're playing bright, bright, bright.
Is that right?
Yeah, bright. They really want the brightest, brightest. So
Wow, that's interesting. Are they miking up the sax, or is it all acoustic?
it's mic'd to the moon. It's loud, and and
Wow.
it's coming through altos brighter than you can imagine.
Wow, that's interesting. There you go. So it's a stylistic thing, right? Depends on the sort of music that you play and what's appropriate for you. All right, that's still the versatility thing is a brilliant second point. And so the third point then, if we were giving a guideline to help with selection for a mouthpiece, would you say really it's about how you go about testing and trying mouthpieces? What could you advise people about that?
Okay, if you get this opportunity, even if you're getting a few in the mail, but especially if you get to a store and let's say you get 5 or 6 mouthpieces in front of you. Number one, come to the store with a good variety of reeds. Like you want to know that you have a reed that you love that's good. You want something a little harder than that, something a little softer, and then you want to experiment. The number one mistake I see people make is they play that first mouthpiece for 45 minutes. And wow, it's probably, hopefully it's better than what you have, but maybe the third mouthpiece is even better than that first one. So I like to get people to play a little bit on the first, try and, if you need to change reeds, get the best reed on it, a couple minutes. Go to the next one and go through all the choices rather quickly, in about 2 minutes each, because you're going to waste your time on that first mouthpiece. I've seen it a million times.
That's interesting.
And you'll never get to the fifth mouthpiece. You'll run out of time, or maybe the store is about to throw you out. But so do that. Like, it's not, choosing a mouthpiece is not dating. It's, you don't have to worry about hurting the feelings of the first mouthpiece or the second. You're not, you didn't come to the dance with that mouthpiece, and you can leave without that mouthpiece. People are really funny about this, about, well, this is my mouthpiece. And,
I love that, though. I love that. It's actually really good advice. I hadn't thought about that, but you must see this all the time in your shop, people coming in and doing the same mistake. So I guess the other thing too is comparing it to your current mouthpiece, right?
definitely
So
A/B comparison.
A/B.
A/B.
Yeah.
Sometimes say do A/B comparison. What's that? Well, you can't know how good this one is unless you compare it to something else. I'm still like that. Somebody says, "How's that horn?" I said, "Well, let me play my horn, and I'll play it again, and then I'll tell you how it compares to my horn." You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same. But it's a really great third point there. So make sure if you get the opportunity to test out a bunch of mouthpieces and don't spend too long on them. A/B test between your current mouthpiece and that one. And don't forget, you won't hurt the mouthpiece's feelings if you leave it in the shop.
I can always hear when something starts to, when it's the right one, because even if I had put, like, they're trying HR stars, and I put a 5, 6, 7, and maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or something, I can be in the other room on the phone, and they're playing, and all of a sudden I hear a vibration, I hear the right resonance, and now I start hearing them, they're playing new stuff or something. It just starts to gel. And I used to think, oh, that's the right tip opening, and then I realized actually that's the right facing length for them. So just so you guys know, in traditional mouthpiece making, the more open the tip, actually, it's the longer facing curve gets, because we have this schedule that we use, and it's the same schedule. We just start it further away from the tip. So that if you practice enough, you can play any tip opening, and then you're just finding the one that just resonates with you. So in a perfect world, Nigel, that they get the model that they like. It's in the sound zone that they like, and it feels good. Then they're able to fine tune it with the tip openings.
Yeah, I love that. One other thing I thought might be useful to add, and I'm interested to see if you agree with this, but I find with mouthpieces, whenever I've gone to a shop and tried a bunch of mouthpieces out, done my A/B testing, tried a bunch of them, not played too long on them, all that sort of stuff, I still find when I make that decision, I bring a mouthpiece home, it's going to take me a month or so of practicing to really settle into that mouthpiece. And I think a lot of people make that mistake of thinking, well, they went to the shop, they tried it, it's great, they bring it home, that's it, they're done now. They can just get used to that mouthpiece. Maybe some people adjust quicker than me, but for me, I've got to resign myself to the fact that it's going to take a few weeks of practicing to really get the most out of that mouthpiece before I can form a proper opinion about it. Do you find that?
I think if you have that luxury, you do want to play it a couple weeks, and if you're out playing with people or in some kind of performance, that's really the best. It tells you what's really happening. Sometimes it's different in your room with the wall right there, and or sometimes you're in a place like when we do big trade shows. There's giant high ceiling, and so the brighter, louder mouthpieces do well because you can't hear yourself if you're playing something darker. And then when you get home, you might be, oh, this is a little brighter than I thought it was. Um, so that little period is very helpful. It's what I do, when I'm prototyping. I take them on the gig, and it really is informative for me to know how it's going to perform out there. So.
Yeah, right. Try them out in the real world. Yeah, brilliant. Well, I really hope this has been helpful for everybody. And I know there's going to be points where people get stuck and they've got more questions and need a bit more help. One of the things I love that you do, Jody, that's been super helpful to all of our members at Sax School is your 6 questions service. Can you tell us quickly about how that works?
Well, it is so confusing. I remember when I started this and I saw the tip openings and the different models and stuff. I'm like, golly, who could do this? Who could figure out what to try? So I started these 6 questions, and I don't have them in front of me, but it's generally, what mouthpiece are you playing now? What's the make and model of your instrument? How many hours a week do you play? And what kind of playing do you do? That's a real important. What do you play in a concert band? Do you play in a rock band? What kind of playing? What do you want to change about your mouthpiece? What's not happening for you? And then I want to know what reed you play, exactly the brand and the tip. I mean the strength, because the brand is very important, and the model, because for example, blue box Van Doren are a half strength harder than a green box Van Doren. So that reed, it's a 1-2 combination. I hate to admit it. I say the mouthpiece is the most important thing, but the reed is about just as important to make that successful thing. So it's like when you get the mouthpiece of your dreams, it's like you have the reed of your dreams. If you've ever had the greatest reed, you're like, I love this reed. That's what having the mouthpiece is like, that every day. And by the way, we're humans doing answering. I've never made it like a algorithm or anything. And so there's always something like, tell us any more, thing you want us to know. So, and that helps a lot, because we're trying to figure it out, what to recommend you. But it's humans answering you.
So that's the free service that you do, Jody, isn't it? We'll put a link in the show notes actually for this episode. So if anyone needs that bit of extra help, they can go and check that out. We've covered so much stuff today, Jody, I think is really helpful for people. Now, I love your mouthpieces, and you've got a huge range of them. But if we had to narrow it down to just one choice that's a starting point, that's probably the mouthpiece in your range that's suitable for most people, what would that be?
There is so much confusion, and there's so many choices, and it seems self-serving. But if I had to just tell somebody, okay, just get this, it's going to be the HR Star. And because I know how careful we are with it, I know how versatile it is. I know if they buy it, it's going to be a good one. And so, like alto, get a 5M if it's your first mouthpiece that you're going to. And if you've been playing for a while, 6M. That's the most popular. Tenor, probably a 6-star. Just get a 6-star. You're going to love it. About a 2.5 reed when you're playing jazz. In there somewhere, 2.5, maybe a 2 H. D'Addario makes the 2H. It's too hard. Kind of really want to dial in your reed strength with these mouthpieces. But the HR Star on all the horns is, I think, one of the best buys in the business. And so it sounds commercial, but I believe it.
Hey, thanks so much, Jody. It's been really, really useful today. And if anyone watching or listening would like to get a recap for today, you can get the full transcription and the PDF from today's episode. That's going to be over at saxschoolonline.com/podcast. We'll put links to Jody's 6 question service and where you can find out more about Jody Jazz over at jodyjazz.com. And if you're not a Sax School member and you'd like to find out about what we're doing at Sax School, there's a link down there too where you can get our 14-day trial. Come along and try out our thousands of lessons. You can get some help from our world-class tutors and connect with our community, even join a live stream session. There's so much happening in Sax School. We'd love to see you in there. But that's it for today. Keep practicing hard. We'll catch you next time.